Today I'm going to talk about Gunpei Yokoi and his legacy on gaming. Yokoi was a Japanese toy maker and game designer, as well as a console designer. In his early life, for context, Yokoi was born about 4 years before the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so he grows up in post war slums in Osaka, Japan, where there's constant food and supply shortages, as well as mass illness due to close quarters and lack of sanitary supplies. There's not a lot of time for entertainment or extra activities, and the focuses of the household are really working, family care, and education. After moving out of the slums and going to Doshisha University, uh, the ANPO protests start to fight against the United States occupation of Japan and the Japanese United States security regulations that arise out of post-war Japan. So his childhood and young adulthood are filled with civil unrest and economic disparity, which sets the tone for Yokoi's mentality about design. After college, Yokoi gets picked up to be a maintenance worker for Nintendo, which at the time only produced card games. While he was there, he made a stretchable arm out of items he found around the factory, which is picked up by the president, and he's asked to mass reproduce these, which goes on to become the Ultra Hand. He then spends 3 years designing games for Nintendo, the Ultra Machine, which launched balls, and 10 Billion Barrels, which was a puzzle game, as well as the Love Tester. The 10 Billion Barrels is still in production today. After the success of these games, Yokoi is brought on to supervise Donkey Kong, whose designer is Miyamoto. Over the course of several years, they work quite closely together, and Miyamoto talks about Yokoi not only being a friend, but also a mentor. One of the biggest impacts of which was telling Miyamoto that one of the funnest parts of Mario Brothers was moving and jumping around quickly. He suggested that Miyamoto should remove fall damage and extend the height and reach of Mario's jump to let him fly around the screen. This recommendation was used and still carries on today as part of Mario's founding key mechanics is the platforming and jumping. Over Yokoi's time at Nintendo, he produced and co-directed over 40 games, which include games like Metroid and Kirby, as well as Game Boy Tetris. After working on cabinets, he was brought on to lead an R&D team to develop consoles for Nintendo. First of which was the Game & Watch, developed after watching a businessman play with his LCD calculator during a meeting. The console could only play one game, and the goal was to keep it as discreet and small as possible because of the social connotation of not being able to play games in public, as well as businessmen not being able to have fun in public. He wanted to make sure people wouldn't notice you playing it, that it was something you could slide in and out of your pocket and play at any time. Yokoi wanted to also make the Game & Watch as cheap as possible. So the goal was also affordability. Even though Japan has reached a point where they have exited their financial disparity, he still knows that families aren't paying a lot of extra money for one-time use or for simple items, essentially. At the As the Game & Watch leaves the production stage and now it's being reproduced with different games, he moves on to work on the Game Boy, where his goal was still affordability and its discrete design. At the time, Nintendo really wanted the Game Boy to have an LCD and color screen, but Yokoi spoke very highly against it. He was saying that it would drive up the price of the console, making it less affordable for people. It would be harsher to reproduce consistently, and so he really wanted it to remain cheap. Um, and then the focus with that was then the cartridges, its ability to play multiple games. He didn't design the cartridge itself, but he actually did do a lot of designing around keeping the games small, the size and computations of these very tight. So a lot of these cartridges didn't need a lot of space. They didn't need to be big. You could carry 4 or 5 games with you at a time, and they weren't taking up too much space in your pocket or in your briefcase. Um, After this time, he goes on to work on Rob and the Virtual Boy, which go on to be two of Nintendo's biggest commercial flops. Um, because of the Virtual Boy and Rob not doing well, he takes that on as personal failings and believes that he no longer can provide what Nintendo wanted from him, so he leaves Nintendo to start Kodo Laboratories. Kodo Laboratories' goal was to focus on LCD single game uh, handheld consoles, kind of like the Game & Watch, but before he is able to produce anything, he passes away in a car accident on October 4th, 1997. So, why is Yokoi's legacy so important? What impact did he have on the game industry and continues to have on the game industry to this day? The first is his legacy on game design. Um, because he saw a lot of disparity and a lot of sadness, he really valued people's enjoyment of games. He really valued how happy people were interacting with games. So he really developed an approach of following the fun. What do people find exciting? What do they enjoy? And what can we do to keep that joy throughout the gameplay? Um, Even though it's not worded as follow the fun, he's not quoted saying that. That is kind of the design theory that comes from this mentality, and people still use to this day. This is a video by Game Maker's Toolkit, kind of explaining in short a case study of this theory.
Of a game design methodology called Follow the Fun. It's the deceptively simple idea that designers should ignore their plans and preconceived ideas and instead look to the game itself to find out where the development should lead. So take the microscopic tactics gem Into the Breach. This game started life as a pretty standard Advance Wars style game where enemies chose attacks at random and hid their intentions until their turn. But one foe in the game would show you exactly what they were about to do on their turn by highlighting the tile they were going to attack. The developers at Subset realized that this was the single most enjoyable part, and so decided to focus the rest of the game almost exclusively on these telegraphed attacks. And this actually helped dictate the rest of the design decisions that the studio had to make. Because if you know what the enemies are going to do, can't you just move your own units out of their attack zone? Alright, maybe the game is actually about protecting static buildings. And so now it's about pushing the enemies around so their attacks will miss. But you could use this to trick the enemies into killing each other. You can probably see why the designers who use this method often say that their game, to some extent, designed itself. Here's Sam of a game design methodology.
Okay. With that being said, too, Miyamoto is still designing games. He still creates games, and he has said that Yokoi's recommendations and his mentorship throughout Miyamoto's career has really helped him become a better designer and a better developer. Because of Yokoi's recommendations, Miyamoto has said that he really tries to focus on a mechanic. If he builds out the mechanics, the visuals will follow. One of Yokoi's thoughts was that just because you have better graphics doesn't mean you have a better game. Part of one of the reasons why he wanted the Game Boy not to have a lot of detail is because if somebody is having fun and they're enjoying a game, he said that the brain will fill in the details. You don't need to give everybody every visual aspect of a game, and that too is what helps people really connect to a game. Um, he has a long legacy in technology as well. The Game Boy has become a cultural symbol in retro handheld gaming. All the modern remakes of retro handhelds favor the Game Boy and its design, some of which emulate Game Boy games, and some of them uh, even use, can read and play back original Game Boy cartridges. Yokoi also starts to advance on the cartridge system. Although he didn't invent it, it already existed. He did work to improve the technology, working on compressing data to fit on a smaller and smaller form factor. Prior to the Game Boy, D-pads also didn't exist. You either had a joystick or separate buttons. But when he was developing the Game Boy, he found that you can't fit that easily into your pocket, so he needed a flat form, and that's where he invents the D-pad. And now they're on almost every single controller that we have on modern day, PlayStation and Xbox being the two biggest examples. The Game & Watch has also been recreated and resold starting in 2020 by Nintendo, proving that its form factor is well loved and timeless. His modern legacy on console development through Nintendo has continued to utilize Yokoi's approach to console development. In a 1996 interview, Yokoi discussed cutting-edge technology does not equate to fun and good gameplay. Nintendo's two largest commercial failures, the Virtual Boy and the Wii U, broke Yokoi's rules by using some new technology, and since then, Nintendo sticks to cheap, reproducible consoles that focus on what games are available at release. For the Wii, the motion controller was made through an out of date accelerator and basic button controls. It was anywhere between $100 to $150 cheaper than any other home console at the time, notably the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Additionally, at the time, the Wii had the most popular motion controls, when both PlayStation and Xbox motion controls turned out to be commercial flops. The Switch, at its original release, also had an outdated, low-quality screen, as well as cheaply made Joy-Cons. It focused instead on the detachable Joy-Cons and ability to have an easy multiplayer setup. Again, focusing on affordability, it wasn't the cheapest out of Nintendo's products, even accounting for inflation. However, it was still cheaper than most consoles that you could plug in just to your TV. And then this had the advantage of being both portable and could be linked to your TV for a larger screen. And Yokoi, in console development as a whole, really is seen as the forefather of handheld portable gaming, due to his work with the Game & Watch and Game Boy. And that's all I have. Thank you.